What's up everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. Welcome to episode 2 of the Jimmy Restoration series in partnership with O'Reilly Auto Parts. In this video, I'll be replacing the power steering pump. If you haven't seen the last video, which was basically the intro to the series, I included the link in the description box below. In that video, I basically went over everything that's wrong with the Jimmy and what you can expect from the series over time, but I also talked about how one of the first things I needed to do was replace this power steering pump because it doesn't hold fluid and it's basically undrivable unless you're just keeping fluid topped off all the time. So, along with replacing the pump, we're also going to replace the lines, clean everything up, and just make sure everything's in good working order.
Also, real quick before we begin, I've been getting a lot of questions lately about some of the other project vehicles, so I figured I would share a couple of updates. Well, obviously we still have Crystal's Chevelle, trying to figure out what kind of series to build this into one day. It needs a lot of body work, rust repair, all that good stuff, so been kind of keeping this car on the back burner till we figure out, how exactly to proceed with it. I still have the 240SX. I am not anywhere near done with that car, but the biggest hindrance to progress on that, at least over the last few months, has been, trying to finish this new garage. I've mentioned the garage in some previous videos and across social media, but I haven't posted a ton about it. I will be filming some dedicated content around it pretty soon, but again, this is the reason why everything has been going so slow lately. I've been trying to get this up and running, and as expected with everything that's been going on from us moving to, whatever, it's just taken a long time. So right now, it's being wired up for electricity. We still got to get lights strung, and within, the next little bit, we'll actually have a 2-post lift going in, which is going to make working on these cars a lot easier. The next big chapter for the 240 is the engine swap. So got a transmission, bunch of parts there, and the built RB25 that I had done at Mazworks a while back. This has actually been sitting here for quite a while, and I have not even opened up the box yet. So we'll have to do some sort of unboxing to launch that section of the project, which I'm really looking forward to learning how to swap an engine and all that, and hopefully collaborating with some of my YouTube friends. But got a whole bunch more parts there, some parts for the restoration side of the project. Just have to get this garage done. It's almost there. Not too much longer and we can really dive into this.
Thanks for sticking with me, guys. Now let's get back to the Jimmy.
So before I start tackling this pump, I'm going to first remove the intake tube. It's super simple. There's a couple hose clamps and screws, and you just lift it out of the engine bay. I'm also going to put some tape over the opening for the throttle body just to make sure no dirt or debris gets in there while I'm working.
With all of that out of the way, we can go ahead and undo the hoses that connect to the pump. There's 2 of them. There's a return hose and a pressure hose. The pressure hose is made of metal and it has threaded fittings on the ends. The return hose is flexible with clamped ends, just like one of the coolant pipes. Now, I'm going to go ahead and replace these with brand new parts just because it's good preventative maintenance, and we're already here and have to undo them anyway, so why not? Before undoing the hoses, it's also a good idea to go ahead and place a drain pan underneath the engine to catch any power steering fluid that might escape. It's pretty simple to undo the hoses. For the pressure hose, just get an open-ended wrench. The return hose, you'll either have to use a flat blade screwdriver or socket wrench, just depends on how much room you have. Now we can move on to removing the power steering pump pulley, but before we do that, we have to release the tension of the serpentine belt. For that, we need this guy. It's the belt tensioner. As the name suggests, its job is to provide tension to the serpentine belt to take out slack. But we want slack, so we can slip the belt off of the power steering pump pulley down below there. To do that, you have to rotate the tensioner assembly counterclockwise. As you can see with that pulley right there, the serpentine belt runs underneath and there's a little nut in front of the pulley. We want to find a socket to fit that nut and fit that socket to a breaker bar or something equivalent to give us good leverage so we can rotate the assembly counterclockwise. Again, that'll release the tension and then we can slip the belt off of the power steering pump pulley. When it comes to removing that pulley down below there, to make life a whole lot easier, I would suggest picking up one of these Pulley Puller and installer kits. O'Reilly actually offers a whole suite of specialty tools that you can of course go out and buy, but if you're not a mechanic doing, regular work on all sorts of different vehicles, sometimes it doesn't make sense to buy all these specialty tools for just, one job. So you can actually go and rent these tools, which is pretty sweet. Well, that was way harder than I think it should have been. The biggest problem here is clearance. There's not much room to work with. You're basically trying to go between the fan shroud and these metal fan blades, trying not to cut yourself on those. You just got to go little by little by little, but, you know, it came out, and, you know, this is a learning process for me, too. I think in hindsight, it would have made it exponentially easier if I took out the fan shroud and maybe even the fan itself, but I'm trying to at least avoid taking out the fan. When it comes to putting in the new pulley that I got, I'll probably at least take out the upper fan shroud. That'll give me just a little bit of extra room. The power steering pump's almost ready to come out. There's a handful of nuts and bolts that I still have to remove, and I also have to take off this black brace behind the pump. When it comes to removing some of these stubborn nuts and bolts, especially around the exhaust manifold where things are super corroded, I like to coat everything in a generous amount of penetrating fluid because it'll help alleviate some of that corrosion, break things loose, and, you know, lubricate the threads so you don't have to worry about stripping quite so much or breaking a stud. You know, there's always a risk with this old stuff, especially down here where you're exposed to, you know, super high temperatures. But thankfully, I didn't have any of the issues like that with the Jimmy. It all came out pretty good, so we can just move on. All that's left to do now is to remove 3 bolts at the front that connect the pump to the mounting bracket. Alright, now for the moment of truth. See if we can get this pump out of here now. Easier said than done, I suppose. After fighting with this thing for a while and just not getting anywhere, I had to take a step back and do some creative problem solving. So, this vehicle uses an engine oil cooler system, and on 4-wheel drive models, the hub is located on the right here. If you look beneath, you could probably just barely see the oil filter. The problem with that is that the lines going to it are in a position that make it almost impossible to clear a little lip down there so you can pull out the end of the power steering pump. I ended up just having to undo the entire alternator bracket assembly. It was just a handful of nuts and bolts, no big deal, and I'm sure there are people out there smarter than I am who have figured out a more creative solution to said problem, but it worked. I moved the bracket out of the way, got the pump out, all is good. Well, we've made it to the halfway point, and as you can see, it's already nighttime because filming makes everything take 10 times longer than it should. And I'm learning through all of this too. You know, it's been a long day, but it's been a very good day. I'm happy with the progress so far. I'm also very proud of myself that I did not screw anything up so far, so that's also nice. There's a bunch of stuff that I need to get before I can continue on, so it's a good stopping point for today. First thing tomorrow, we're going to head to O'Reilly, grab some power steering fluid, some hose clamps, and some other knickknacks, so see you guys in a bit. Alright, so a few more things before we continue on. Got to get the power steering fluid, hose clamps, some other knickknacks here and there, and let's see if we can find some new hardware as well. So one thing I didn't realize until I started working on the 240SX is that O'Reilly actually has quite a significant selection of replacement hardware. So if you have a bunch of nuts and bolts that have just seen better days, you can come here, match everything up, and hopefully find a replacement. Alright, back at the garage, I have the old power steering pump sitting next to the remanufactured unit that I picked up. Looks really nice. It's got a fresh coat of paint on it. It's got this bolt washer set up so you can use to put the pulley on if you want. I got to take the old bracket off of this one, transport it over, and start reattaching some lines. You can actually see on the original one where the majority of fluid was leaking out. It's quite gummy down there, but yeah, out with the old, in with the new. Putting this thing back in is going to be a lot easier than it was taking it out. I can do most of the assembly outside of the vehicle, which is super nice because once all of the, main stuff is connected, I can just drop the majority of the assembly in as one unit and just go from there. Also, something that I've learned really, really quickly is that anything that can fall in the engine will, so make sure you keep all of your loose nuts and bolts away from, like, the fenders and this area and stuff. Don't do what I've been doing. I've been doing that, and I've already, dropped several bolts and stuff that I've gotten lucky and found and whatnot, but it's just a good rule of thumb. Just take all that stuff away, keep everything nice and organized on the side, and it will make your life so much easier when it comes to putting all this back together. Alright, fast forward a bunch, and we are almost done. Got the new pulley in, as you can see. Got a bunch of new hardware. Got the serpentine belt routed. I went ahead and took out the plastic upper radiator shroud just to give me some extra clearance. I noticed this one had a pretty huge crack in it, so while it's out, I'm going to go ahead and replace it. I didn't grab the one off of my 94 parts Jimmy because I'm not quite ready to start really tearing into that yet. So, I went to the local pull-apart. Thankfully, they had a 94 Jimmy that actually had some other stuff that I grabbed as well, so that's pretty sweet. This one also has the routing diagram for the serpentine belt still. Sweet. All that's left to do now is reconnect the intake tube. There's a couple vacuum lines I have to put together and reconnect the alternator. Then we can finally load this thing up with power steering fluid and bleed it. Before I load up the fluid in here, let's go ahead and double check that everything has been put back together correctly. So I've already double checked the torque on the bolts for everything here. The vacuum line's connected. The alternator is back up. The intake is back on. I think we're in good shape. Let's fill her up. So when it comes to bleeding the power steering system, you're going to want to lift the vehicle up and take the load off of the front wheels, because when you first fill it up to where it's, you know, decently full but not too much, and while it's up in the air and the vehicle is off, just turn the wheel lock to lock, back and forth, allowing the fluid to circulate in there and help purge all of that extra air out. Throughout the process, the fluid is likely going to drain into the system, which means you're going to have to continually top it off until it reaches a more stable level. Give her one more top off, and we should be good to go. The other thing you want to double check for are leaks. So, you know, all the new hoses I put on, you know, make sure you didn't get a defective pump, all of that kind of stuff. And underneath, even after, you know, turning the wheels left and right a whole bunch of times, there's no drops. I don't see anything wet around the areas we worked on, so I think we're ready to connect that battery up and fire this bad boy up. After I start this up, we're going to repeat the same procedures I was doing a second ago, just with it running. There's no whining from the power steering pump or anything like that. Everything seems pretty normal. It's also pretty smooth, but we'll double check that out on the road. Real quick, let's double check the belt. Make sure everything is in good working order. All looks pretty straight. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Now that the engine is run for a minute, we need to actually add a little bit more. Well, everything's buttoned up, looking fantastic. Nothing abnormal to report as far as the power steering system is concerned. I think it's just as good a time as any to go for a test drive. This is pretty sweet. It's the first time you guys have seen the Jimmy out on the road. The steering feels fantastic, or as fantastic as you would expect for one of these vehicles. One of the things that I want to do, or one of the videos that I want to do a part of this series, is updating the steering system. So, you know, we've already done the pump, but gosh, it doesn't communicate a whole lot. There is literally this much play in the steering. It is absolutely insane. You got to correct it a lot, and I think the steering gear itself is just worn out. It's not a huge deal right now, but it's definitely something that I want to replace along with, you know, the other steering components. So expect a video on that in the future. Some of the other things that are wrong that need more immediate attention, there's a pretty bad oil leak that I've noticed. I mean, it's always leaked oil. You know, a vehicle this old is going to leak somewhere, something. And it's gotten a little bit worse, and I think it's actually the oil pan or something around the oil pan. So I got to dive into that a little bit more. See if we can shoot a video on doing that, because it's probably going to be one gnarly repair. And I talked about in the last video towards the end that it's leaking coolant pretty bad. I think it's actually one of the hoses, but it's a pretty good time, I think, to shoot a video on just updating the cooling system. The radiator was supposed to be new, or, you know, the guy told me that it was new when I bought it, and it seems fine. So we can do, you know, change out a whole bunch bunch of stuff, change out the hoses, change out the water pump. One thing that kind of makes me nervous is that the temperature gauge doesn't work. So with it leaking coolant and the gauge not working, it's like, oh no. So kind of got to keep it topped off and stuff, but I don't drive it a whole lot as it is. I want to make sure to get all of that cooling system stuff done first before we really take this on any long journeys or anything like that. I'll tell you guys what, it feels really good, you know, the satisfaction of being able to do this myself and see the results of it, because it was way gnarlier than I ever thought it would be. I mean, it was nuts. All of my more mechanically inclined friends are saying, you know, that the power steering pumps are just no fun in general, and I would definitely agree, and I appreciate all of those friends who are more than willing to take a phone call and help me work out the, you know, kinks and stuff like that. But you know, the results speak for themselves. Everything turned out fantastic, and I couldn't be happier. So what's next for the Jimmy? The cooling system video is going to be the next that I start working on, because it's obviously really important. You can't have coolant leaking everywhere, and I'd like to know what temperature I'm running at. It's kind of important. So we're going to do that next. I'm going to replace the water pump. I still got to order a bunch of stuff from O'Reilly. I got my whole parts list and everything broken down, so I got to take the cord back, my old power steering pump, so I'll do that and just knock everything out all at once. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Of course, there's a lot more content coming, not just with the Jimmy, but the 240SX and even some other stuff I have working on the pipeline. So if you haven't subscribed already, be sure to, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. And again, leave a like below. I really appreciate it. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.